And welcome once again to Off the Wall. I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Brook. Religious cults affect upwards of between 300,000 and 3 million people, directly or indirectly, in the United States. Today we're going to meet with people that have had their lives dramatically altered by being a member of a cult or by being related to a cult member. We're also going to meet with people that directly engage in deprogramming. Of course, this is quite controversial. And we're going to find out more about deprogramming, and we want you to stay with us because I think this program, one way or another, may have a direct bearing on your life. And we're going to meet with Mark Roggeman. Is this right, Mark?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Mark, you have engaged in the, I hesitate to say occupation, but the activity of deprogramming. And I understand you are the president here in Colorado of the Citizens Freedom Foundation. Tell us a little bit about the Citizens Freedom Foundation. What does that organization stand for?
Okay, the Citizens Freedom Foundation was founded in 1971 and was founded by parents who wanted to start an organization where other parents, they could help each other who had children involved in a cult somewhere. And it started in California and since spread throughout the country. And now there's about 52 affiliates throughout the nation. Some
30 states, I understand.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Some of the states, like California, have 3 or 4 affiliates. And there's anywhere from 5,000 or 6,000 actually full-time members throughout, and a lot of, members around the edges.
Okay. It is a support and an educational and an awareness organization for people who are involved in cults.
That's correct. That's one thing they do locally. They try to educate people, as we're doing now, try to make them aware of what cults do, how people get involved.
Yeah. Mark, let me interrupt. What would be the Citizens Freedom Foundation position on deprogramming, on forcible deprogramming?
As an organization, the Citizens Freedom Foundation, in their statement, is against involuntary deprogramming. And that's even what they state in their corporate papers.
Yeah. What makes you believe that deprogramming can really benefit individuals? What has been your direct experience with that?
Well, I know it can benefit them because I've seen many people who are involved in cultic groups come out because of the process, the counseling. That would be the most.
Okay, so what is so destructive about being a member of a cult? Doesn't that provide kind of a secondary family to people, a support group, some meaning into their lives? What's so destructive?
Well, that's one of the things that the cult wants the people to think, that it does provide a support group, when in reality they don't. That's the initial, usually, lure, is that we can help you some way, and the emotional lure of the other people. But really, it's usually buried in deception, and that's the first thing I would say that bothers me about a cultic structure, makes it dangerous. A lot of people go in under the false pretenses and don't know it's really a religious structure, or there's doctrines involved or something to that aspect.
Okay, you're saying then they're really deceived, they're misled. Let's move on to Deanne Rear. Now, Deanne, you at one point moved out to San Francisco, and if I can use the term, were lured into the Unification Church. Okay? Now, you were never told this was a Unification Church.
Correct.
Okay. How did they involve you in this process? What was the come-on?
The 2 men who approached me on the street in San Francisco just immediately started asking questions about me personally. It was very odd just to have a stranger walk up off the street in San Francisco, and it was the first time I'd been in a city in a number of years, and it was quite a different experience. But to have these 2 gentlemen walk up to me and start talking to me, and they asked me where I was from, and I mentioned a farm in Colorado, and they immediately picked up on the fact that they could tell I was very close to my farm, that Colorado was really special to me. So they told me about the farm that they had in Northern California, and that they worked for a volunteer group, the Creative Community Project, and that they raised food for the needy people in the city.
Sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
It sounded wonderful, and it was, my attitude was, that's wonderful. Great, I'm glad someone does that. It was a very short conversation, and towards the end, they said, oh, by the way, we're having an open house tonight, just like it was a spur-of-the-moment thing that they were going to be doing, not something that they do every night of the week for the past many years they've been doing it. I would
So,
not
so
have
what,
gone
are,
by
what are you
myself.
doing tonight kind of a thing?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, we have a lot of people from all over the world, a lot of different occupations, musicians, doctors, lawyers. Good chance to meet some people. And I said, well, thank you, but no. Being by myself, I would not have gone over to the home by myself. But later on in the day, I'd met up with a previous acquaintance of mine, and he had met 8 people from the same group down in the same area. So they were out heavily recruiting. I mean, when they hit the streets, they hit the streets. And, you know, they'll send out 20 people.
Okay.
Very,
Yeah. So trace then, Deanne, your experience in terms of at what point did you feel you were a member of this group, that you became an insider? What was that process? How long did it take? What were some of the techniques they used?
I'd say it probably took about 5 to 6 weeks. Through that time, I spent 4 weeks going through lectures, the same repeated lectures. There's probably a series of 4 days of lectures, 2 to 3 lectures a day that you sit through, and you sit through the same lectures over and over for 3 or 4 weeks. I took a break for a week and went up to the farm. When I met the group, I didn't have any money, and you had to pay to go to the farm. It was really funny. I didn't have any, so they said, well, by the way, we have a carpet cleaning crew that's going out tonight. You know, you can work a few hours with them. Well, working a few hours, I thought that's just what it would be. And by then, it was about 10 o'clock in the evening. I worked from 11 o'clock that night until 8 o'clock the next morning with a 15-minute break.
Didn't you question this? I mean, I understand you're a rather independent young lady here. And how old were you at this time, by the way?
21, 22?
21 or so?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Didn't you, I mean, why would you spend all night working for these people?
It felt great.
Felt good. Okay.
I'd been on vacation for a couple of weeks and not really active, and to be just physically doing something. The 2 men that I was working with were singing the whole time, very energetic, smiling and happy. I mean, they loved what they were doing. I mean, it just gushed everywhere, and I caught it. You know, I was having fun
So
too.
it became contagious.
Very much so.
Okay, great. Let's meet your father, because things did not become so positively contagious for him. George Rear, and George, you are semi-retired, I understand.
Yes.
And tell us about your family. How many children do you have?
We have
You and your
4
wife, Doris, by the way.
Doris. Doris and I have 4 children. The oldest is Candace, who lives in Portland. She's 31. We have a son, Mark, who lives in the Denver area, who's 28. Deanne, this is her birthday
Today.
today,
Okay.
and she's 26. And I
I'd
have
like to add something. It's my physical birthday, not my spiritual birthday. I didn't celebrate one for a couple of years. So.
right. And I have a daughter in the audience who is 24.
Okay, we'll meet her in just a little while. At what point did you become concerned about what was happening to Deanne here?
Well, she went to Frisco, taking some people out. She didn't go out there on a vacation, really. She went out to help some people, which she's always doing. This girl will help anybody in the world. And she got shortchanged, didn't have enough money to come home on, didn't want to write us. She got involved with the Moonies, and we hadn't heard from her for a longer period of time than normal. We were starting to get worried. And we were about ready to call the police in San Francisco when we got a letter from her. And in this letter, she stated that she'd found a job working on a farm. And she had a dog who she dearly loved. And in this letter, she mentioned she might have to give up the dog because the dog was chasing cows. And that didn't seem just right.
This was a sin, right? For the dog to do this? Even the dog was a sinner, right?
No.
Well, what was happening was the dog was distracting me from what was going on in the camp.
Right.
I had an attachment.
To that dog,
And to
and
the dog was
they
stronger.
had to break the dog away from her.
How long had you had this dog?
A year and a half.
A year and a half. So there's somewhat of a real bond there.
Oh, yes,
that-
very strong
that you
bond.
had. Uh-huh.
But anyway, after that, we got another letter from her, and in that letter, she stated that she kind of liked the city, and
That wasn't Deanne.
This wasn't Deanne, because after she had graduated from high school and moved to the Western Slope, her mother and I had tried to get her to come home just to establish herself, build up a little cash reserve, and then go back out into the world if she wanted to, because she was kind of living from hand to mouth on the Western Slope, odd jobs and so forth.
Okay. Let me cut you off at this point. I want to get your wife involved in this a little bit from her perspective, and we'll get right back with you. Come up here and join me. Let's have your name.
Doris Rick.
Okay. Doris, this was quite an intense time for you.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you feel your daughter was lost forever?
Yes, I did. When we located her in San Francisco, actually Berkeley, at the Hearst Street house, we had no idea. George said he sort of thought something was wrong, but couldn't put his finger on it. And I, of course, did not think of a cult at all. And when we located her in the Hearst Street house and discovered what she was in, we were devastated. We spent a very emotional afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
I still get emotional.
That's okay. That's okay. Because, you had 4 children, but there's only one and only Deanne.
Right, there's one Deanne.
Yeah.
And so we had a very emotional afternoon, and she wouldn't leave with us to go to lunch. We wanted to take her to dinner.
Wait
She
a minute,
wouldn't leave.
Why not? Why not? Were they watching you? Were you...
Very
Okay.
much so.
Yes, it was-
How did they influence you not to even go out to lunch with your father and your mother?
Well, the fact that there's a possibility of a deprogramming. Something would be said. Mainly, what they would say would be that I had to sacrifice that. There are things that I had to give up. Okay, this is the excuse that they use. And yet at the same time, they're telling me, your parents, there's the possibility of deprogramming. And yet they never came out specifically and said it like that. It was always there.
Okay, so the
And someone who's
mistrust was created, in essence,
Right.
between you
I
and
had a spiritual mother, and she came down from the camp to be there with me, to support me, because it was not going to be easy to see my parents and not go with them. So she was there to support me, and several times I left the room, and we would go upstairs and pray.
So she was there to support you, but on the other hand, she was there to monitor your behavior.
Pretty much,
More or
yes.
less like your guard.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a very
She was
friendly,
called from
in a
the
very
room
loving way.
a number
Yeah,
of
it was.
times during the afternoon. And she said, her daddy says, "Why won't you leave?" And she said, "Because you might kidnap me." And he said, "How could we possibly physically kidnap you, Deanne? You're too strong. We wouldn't even consider doing that." But they, of course, had put this in her mind that we would, and she would not leave with us. So after about 4.5 hours, we decided to leave. We just wanted to run, get away, So when we said goodbye to her, I really felt I'd lost her.
Forever.
Mm-hmm.
What can we say, George and Doris, to other parents that would be watching this program who, perhaps this hasn't affected them yet, but regrettably, as I understand it, Mark, people who get in cults are relatively together young people. They're idealistic, they're intelligent, they're educated. These aren't like, winos off the street that we're talking about, or necessarily even school dropouts.
No, they're really the cream of the crop.
The cream of the crop.
They really are.
So what can we say to parents who would be watching now where this might touch their lives?
Well, first and foremost, to educate your children from the time they're small about cults, and not to trust somebody coming up offering them
Okay.
love and
Okay.
friendship.
But what
ask questions.
Okay, but
Teach
what
your
is a
children.
cult? See, that's, I think, a confusion people are going to have. What would constitute a very nice fellowship, in fact, even on college campuses? A type of religious fellowship that might be available, as opposed to an outright controlling cult. What would make the difference?
Mark, you want to do that?
Well, I think going along with what you were asking her on the warning, I guess what you're alluding to is that she doesn't, you don't educate your children to look over their shoulder that everybody's, evil and everybody's bad. And I think the warning would be just to be careful about people who are instantly your friends, who instantly care about you. I'm not saying there are some people out there that really do, but to question them. Don't be afraid to question people and to find out where they're really coming from. If they're evasive about some answers or what they're really involved in, I would say don't have anything to do with them. And those are the kind of groups we're looking at when we're talking about cults that aren't honest up front.
They'll offer, there's a saying out on the streets, there is no such thing as a free lunch
Not even in San Francisco.
anywhere.
And anything has a price.
Right.
Okay.
And when they offer you all these things without you giving something in return, watch out for them.
So that's excellent advice, not just to parents, but to young people, to everyone.
People on the street.
I think one thing that's extremely important, and Mom mentioned something about, is educate your children. Not just educate your children about cults, but the process in which you educate your children. Make them question. Make them think for themselves. Don't just let them sit there and take what someone's feeding them. Not at all. They have to look into things themselves. And I think that's the most important
I
thing.
appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that to
You're
us.
welcome.
I appreciate that very, very much. Let me find out from someone else. Come on up. We're going to meet someone else who's been in a cult. What is your name?
Cynthia Manuel.
Okay, tell us a little bit about Cynthia Manuel. What got you involved in the cult? Which cult was it?
Okay, I was involved in Synanon. And the reason that I went in at 20. I was involved in drugs. And Synanon was initially, way back in 1968, involved in a drug rehabilitation program. And I went in to be cured of all that ailed me, including the drug habits, and the personal problems. And I kind of wanted a pill. I wanted a relief from, the war in Vietnam was going on. I had friends being killed. I decided that school wasn't what I really wanted after all, so I dropped out of college.
But what made this a cult experience as opposed to a therapy program?
Well, it had some aspects of a cult at the very, very beginning, but over a period of time, it became a cult, as opposed to a utopian community, for instance. I went in for therapy. I stayed, I stayed because it was a utopian community, and that's what I wanted. I was idealistic, and I wanted to find a better world. And they convinced me that by staying, I could make a better world. And that really appealed to me. Instead of just escaping from things, I could do something about it. And so I stayed to build utopia.
How long were you in this utopia?
I was in there for 8 years.
Excuse me.
Just 8 years.
Just 8.
She made a really good point. The fact that she was in a utopia, and yet the only way that they could achieve the perfect world is for her to stay there. If she was to leave,
Right.
that's it.
Right. If you left, you went back to the rotten world that existed out there. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people wouldn't leave. Besides being afraid to leave, they told you went back out there and you would die. They convinced me, personally, that I would die because I didn't know how to cook. This is something that my weakened brain actually accepted, and even knowing that TV dinners existed. I was really afraid that if I left, I would die.
Okay.
It was sort of a real fear of going back into a world that I had wanted to drop out of to begin with.
Okay. Cynthia, do you feel you were exploited in some other ways for the organization?
Well, sure, because similar to, the work ethic was really something. As in other cults, you worked. You were constantly told that you didn't work enough and that you could never repay Synanon for what they gave to you. We cured you, you're no longer on drugs. If you go out there, you're going to be back on heroin or whatever you were on before. So you owe us a lot. You owe us your life. So you have to work.
Ooh, so you're really indebted.
Yeah, they made you completely indebted to the group. And you had to
What did you do
work.
for them?
Well, I did a variety of things. I started out as a waitress. I was a secretary. I worked in the school for a long time. They had a really fantastic school there.
Did you work outside of Synanon?
No.
You
Some
never
people
did. It was
did.
always within.
Yes, always within the community, although some people did work outside.
Yeah. Hold up for just a moment. Now, Deanne, it's reported you are estimated, not by the IRS, but you earned somewhere upwards of $150,000 tax, after taxes, over a 2-year period. In fact, in 1 month, brought in over $10,000. What, selling flowers?
No, I was working for one of their front companies, one of their businesses, which is Original World Products, which I now believe is Time Arts. Time
Keep
Arts.
changing the names.
Continually, while I was in. Now, I was on the selling team for only 15 months, and that's how I kind of figured out my averages and stuff. But I think we changed 2 or 3 times in that 15 months, just our name for that one company.
So you really repaid your indebtedness many times over. Okay. See, I think some of the estimates are with the Unification Church, for example, that their holdings, real estate and otherwise, are upwards of $200 to $300 million. And it's estimated they bring in somewhere $100 to $200 million each year of income. So, I mean, there are rather corporate cults, if you will,
Oh, yes.
you know, in our midst, as opposed to the smaller versions, you know, the generic cults, if you will, that are much smaller scale. But I suppose the exploitation can go across any one of a number of areas. The family of God has a particular sexual exploitation aspect. Are you familiar with this one?
Yeah, you're talking about the children of God or the family of love.
Yes, family of love.
Yeah,
yes.
the leader has twisted Scripture. I mean, it's not just a matter of translating, but to promote, he has a little tract he puts out called Hooking for Jesus, and has the women selling themselves to raise money for Christ.
And to bring in new members.
And to bring in new members, and also is encouraging lesbian activity now, and is using Scripture to back.
That's one of the big controls that they use within a thought reform environment, and we'll get into those steps. Well, one of them, like Mark is saying, is demand for purity. And what happens is the cult leader sets the outline, sets the standards for what purity is. And whichever way the cult leader would go, his group will usually follow. It may take a few years, depending on how long it takes for it to get down the hierarchical scale, down to the lower members. But anything becomes justified because their standards have been set by the group leader, and that is what's pure, and you have to become part of that.
See, this is driving some people absolutely bananas watching this, because they cannot really believe that very intelligent people such as yourselves, and, you know, hundreds and thousands and perhaps millions of others, you know, can really be misled to do these various activities, to be exploited in such, you know, dramatic ways. You know, how do we explain that? I mean, because they're not going to believe this, you know, unless it happened to them. I mean, there's an actual technique going on here, isn't there, Mark?
Sure. Just real quick, I allude to something that I did just to find out the question you're asking. I had myself recruited into the Unification Church. And I went down to the bus station because I knew that's one of the places where they hung around, and tried to look lonely and everything else. Pretty
Took a
tough.
course on looking lonely.
Looking lonely, yeah. But eventually I was approached after 2 hours by a young man who began telling me basically the same kind of things that, you know, Deanne was hearing. Basically that just conversation about who I was, where I came from, my theory on world problems, communism, abortion, all the big issues, and the things that people would like to, you know, discuss from that point of view. And but the one thing I noticed in the bus station, even before them, and I used to sit there and watch them, they will become whatever you are for the sake of bringing you into the group. I have seen the same member of the Unification Church recruiting talk to a Jewish young man on one side and tell him that he was Jewish, and go to the other side of the bus station and become a Christian.
Okay, this is practicing heavenly deceit.
Yeah, in that group. Yeah,
heavenly deception.
that's correct. So what you're saying when you ask the question, how can someone get involved? They're getting involved in something they don't know what it's really about. Now, I knew what I was going to. I was waiting. I was probably a little too eager. But when I went up there, 3 days I was up there. It was long hours, a lot of emotionalism, a lot of singing. I saw people after 3 days just simply tire out and begin to accept because they were no longer analyzing or critically analyzing the information coming in.
So basically psychologically fatigued into
That's
the
right.
acceptance. Let me find out a little bit more from Cynthia. We have a few more minutes. What led you to recognize that after 8 years you wanted out? You needed to be cured from Synanon.
I got tired of being told what to do. I started questioning. It's a funny thing. I was taking a magazine. Magazines were not encouraged or discouraged in our group. I was taking Ms. Magazine and beginning to think thoughts of, non-sexist lifestyles. And I began noticing some things that happened in our group that I didn't exactly approve of or like.
Such as, just one example.
Well,
Is this the head shaving type of thing?
yeah, well, that did come into our group too, but it seemed that the men were definitely the leaders in our group, as they are in most cults. And the women, I think, most of the time took a lesser role. And at one point were even sort of told to stay out of the political aspects of things. So there were very few, women who were up there in top management. Like other cults, it was the leader, the one man who told us what to do, who set the standards. And whatever he said, that was what you had to do.
Helen Gurley Brown would not look favorably on that.
Well, I began to get tired of having someone else telling me what I needed to do to be, perfect. And I had just before I left, I had a child. And when I had her, or prior to that, we were told that being parents and having children was really an excellent thing. And that by having them in groups, that would, save the community a lot, and it would be
having them in groups?
In groups, yeah. We had them in groups. We kind of, people who wanted to have children kind of banded together, and then everyone would sort of you formed a group, and then you would try to have the babies all together so you could share the experience. As close in timing as possible.
I think this is another program, yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so before the babies were good. Okay, and then right after, I had the child, babies were no longer a good thing. The leader changed his mind. And that was a little too fast for me when I was having all these mushy-gushy mother feelings, for this child, to have the leader suddenly say, that's no good anymore.
Right.
I couldn't take her back.
Right,
It was really hard.
Sure. So very briefly then, what was the way you left? You just walked out one day?
No, I did not just
How did you
walk
do that?
out. I was in a lot of trouble before I left because of what was called negativity. Now, all groups have negativity, and a lot of them use the same word. Negativity is when they think that you're faltering, when you're not, walking that line, when you're not accepting what the leader wants you to believe in. They know when you're becoming negative. And they start throwing that word at you, and they start maybe even trying to kind of, in our group, it was trying to push you out a little bit. So I was in trouble. I had several jackpots at that point under my belt, and I was writing letters to my sister saying that I was confused for the first time. And she was coming back with some more questions. She picked up on that. I think that's very important, for parents and sisters and brothers, who are outside of the groups to really tune in to what's happening to the group member.
Okay, I'm going to have to move us on. Basically, how did you leave?
I left because my sister came to help me leave, and she said, when I faltered at the last moment and said, I don't know, maybe I really want to stay, she said, I'm walking out that door. If you don't come with me, that's it. This is the last chance you get. And I got up and left.
Good for
And that's
you.
the only way I could do that.
And we're glad you did. We're really glad you did. We're going to have to walk out this door just very briefly. We want you to stay with us for more of Off the Wall. We're dealing with religious cults and deprogramming. And would you please thank all of my guests and our audience at this point? Would you please? Thank them all. The Wall, I'm your host, Dr. Bryan Brook, Religious Cults and Deprogramming. We want you to stay with us as we learn from people who have personally shared this experience in their life, what led them to choose a religious cult over a more conventional lifestyle. Let me find out from you, if you'll join me. Who do we have?
I'm Everett Kiefer.
Everett Kiefer. What is your involvement here with cults?
I somewhat work as a liaison with the public in regard to the telephone and trying to screen and somewhat trying to put parents in with other parents so that they can have some help.
Yeah, this is with the Citizens Freedom Foundation.
Yes.
Okay, that helps people involved in some cult activity.
Yes.
What concerns you most about cult activity in this country?
The thing that concerns me most is the fact of these young people of losing 3 or 4 years of their life and realize it after they're out, and yet the cult leader becomes quite wealthy and using them in a destructive means.
So basically, losing 3 or 4 years and being exploited in the process.
That is very, very true.
Becoming an indentured servant, if we will.
Yes.
Yeah. What is it that happens with the parents? How are you able to assist them?
Well, when a parent calls up, is that we invite them over, and where we just sit down and discuss, and and try to see what their needs are. And most of the time, if we can get them in contact with other parents, perhaps of the same cult, to where that they can talk with them and can discuss it and realize, especially if there's some parent where the kid is no longer in the cult, realizing that there is light on the other side.
Yeah. Let me stay right here with me, Mr. Keefe. Mark Roggeman, for those members of cults that we're aware of, whether it be part-time membership or full-time, how long do people generally stay with cults? How long does it take before people re-examine, as we heard in our first section?
I don't even know if there's an average time. Because when people who do leave and begin to examine, it's because they see an inconsistency. So that could happen at any time, at any level.
So it could be 8 days, 8 weeks, 8 years, as we heard.
Well, a lot of these new groups that have been around, let's say, have been around about 13 years. And you have members that have been there since the beginning and all the way from one month to the time, to the present time.
Okay. And Deanne Rear, you were involved then with the Unification Church 2 years. Do you feel those 2 years are lost forever? They were basically wasted? You were exploited? How do you view it?
I certainly don't feel they were lost. I don't believe anything that I've ever done in my life is totally a waste or a loss. I learned a lot, a great deal.
Would you do it again?
No.
Why not? Why not if it was that meaningful?
Because I think there's other ways that are to learn those things, more constructive ways that aren't exploiting people. I feel that I survived real well.
And you may be an exception.
She was.
She was. Let's find out from your dad once again.
One thing I'd like to add to that is
yes.
that what happened is that even because I made money, because it was so easy for me to fundraise and to make money, I was left alone. I was doing my mission, and they totally left me alone. But what I saw happening to other people who were not making their goals and quotas, who were having to do fasting, incredible conditions, cold shower conditions, prayer conditions, working conditions, just a number of things, and seeing the suffering and the mental and physical torture that they went through.
And there happened...
That's when, even though it didn't personally happen to me, I saw it happening. I was involved in it. And because I learned something doesn't mean that someone else in that group is doing as well.
And there have been people who have committed suicide, either within a cult experience or thereafter. So not everyone does survive. George, what has come out of this experience for you in terms of your daughter being in the Unification Church for 2 years, and you literally, what shall we say, hired a deprogrammer?
Yes,
As a last resort.
Yes. As we had in our article last February in the Empire section, we searched every way and every means legally to take our daughter out, or to get her out. And we talked to law enforcement agencies, lawyers, deprogrammers, counselors, and then we finally hit on to Mr. Kiefer and his wife Mary. And after talking to them and talking to other people who had had their children deprogrammed by means of forceful picking them up off the streets, and after listening to our daughter on the phone getting further and further and further away from us, we decided that she'd lost enough time out of her life.
And from your life.
Well, she had moved away, but we knew she was she was a robot.
And that's what's sort of getting to you talking about.
We wanted her to have her own mind back.
See, that's what we want to get across to people watching.
And this is why we decided to go in, kidnap her, and have her deprogrammed so she could return to a normal, everyday life.
Yeah. Let me find out, because I appreciate your expressing all that. What is the legality here in terms of what George Rear did here. She was not a minor.
She was not a minor, and it varies in regard to state, but in far as the United States is concerned, it is my understanding that the Lindbergh kidnapping law exempts parents. And in fact, even in one case up in Washington, the judge specifically made the statement, and this was the United States District Court, specifically made the statement that parents who thought that their children were under mind control or drugs, etc., that they ought to do something about it, just as if they were hurt or injured, and etc. And that case was appealed into the appeals court, and the appeals court upheld his decision.
Very, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. I do appreciate that. Let me find out. Why don't you join me? Who do we have?
Peter Kershaw.
Okay, Peter, what's your involvement here in the cults?
My involvement has recently been stirred up because I've dated Deanne for about a year after she came out of the Moonies. I've seen her come out of the Moonies, I wouldn't say a basket case, but significantly injured from the whole experience, and I feel she's recovered quite well from that. My own personal experience occurred when I was 18 years old and had just graduated from high school. I met a young lady on the street who was very effervescent and bubbly and seemed very warm and loving toward me. People like that were just rather uncommon, and so I was attracted to her, and she invited me over to the house where they all lived, and it was obvious to me it was a communal type arrangement. It seemed on the up and up, and later on I discovered that the organization was called the Children of God.
Okay. Did you become a member of this organization?
Yes, I did.
For how long?
Very brief period, about 3 months.
Okay. What was inside of you that told you this wasn't for you?
Well, what told me was just to reiterate a point that Deanne made about parents teaching their children. I was raised by two very strong Bible-believing, born-again Christians, and my mother especially is very analytical. She's a very critical person. She instilled that in me. I was raised in good fundamentalist type Christian churches all my life, and knew the Bible extremely well for somebody my age. The Children of God is commonly referred to as a Bible cult because they take biblical scripture and utilize them and twist the scriptures to suit their own desires. Moses David, who is the leader of the group, claims to be a prophet and gives prophetic utterances which tend to change an awful lot just to suit his own personal interest.
So basically your personal style, being analytical and being well versed in biblical study kind of held you through this experience.
That's correct.
Great. I'm glad it did. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Let me find out from someone as well. Yeah, come on up. Yeah.
The only question I'd like to ask is what is actually involved in deprogramming? What were some of the aspects that took place whenever you were deprogrammed?
Okay, that's a good point. And let's also get to Mr. Lifton's points on what determines a cult, and then that can lead us into this question as well.
Okay. You want to do that first?
Yeah, let's kind of put them together. Yeah.
Okay, I'll briefly kind of go over what happened to me and my feelings through that period of time. I was picked up physically off the street by two gentlemen. As soon as I was touched, I thought it was mugging. But the individual said my name and said at the end, "Everything's okay. Your father only wants to speak to you." So then I realized what was happening. I was kind of stunned. I didn't want to fight, but I didn't want to go. So I sat down, and they had to pick me up and take me to the car. It's something that's really interesting. Through the thought reform that we'll get into, mystical manipulation type of thing, they get into this like dreaming, and you should have dreams of Father, Reverend Moon, Mr. Moon, and dreams that have a very spiritual significance. I'd never dreamed the whole time I was in the church. The morning that I was picked up, the first morning that I woke up during the programming, right before I woke up, I had a dream that there was a an intense rainbow all the way across the sky. And it was just so totally peaceful, and everything was okay.
That was the rainbow, and on the other side, I guess, was pot of gold.
Pot of gold,
parents.
right.
Yeah.
But it was just this incredible, peaceful feeling that I hadn't felt in 2 years. And it was just incredible. And it was just like, it was okay. There was nothing wrong with me being there in that motel room.
Yeah, and the deprogramming is really counseling, is it not?
Yeah, well, see, one of the things that Deanne's saying is the reason sometimes it becomes necessary to pull them out of the group like that is they need that time away from that constant structure. You know, the other members, the isolation psychologically and physically. And sometimes I've seen people start to come around, like she's saying, just after a couple days away from the group, because for the first time they're seeing another source of information they haven't seen for, years.
Sure. Yeah.
Was there ever a time when you were going through the deprogramming that you thought that you were going back into something else, you were being programmed into something else than what you should be?
Never. I think it was very, very fair. And like what's been mentioned, it's a counseling session. It's a period of time where people can sit down and discuss just like this, back and forth, different ideas, present information that the individual has not had for their period of time in the group.
Okay, how long does deprogramming take normally? Just depends on the individual, or?
I would say an average would be a week. It's usually 3 days, but about a week.
What's the average of people that go back into it after they've been deprogrammed? Do you have any?
I did.
I've read where it was about 10%.
Yeah, that's about right. About 10% do go back.
Okay. Thank you very much for asking.
And I want to add something there, is that I think even though those people go back, they've had the information presented to them. They've been shown what's there. And that's the important thing. If someone wants to be in that type of environment, in that controlled situation, that's their choice. But they have to know what they're dealing with and have that choice to do so.
I want to answer Deanne.
Come on up so we can hear you.
I want to answer Deanne in regard to going back, and that there's been quite a few cases of kids that have went back and stayed for a month or 3 months, and then they have come back out themselves and realized what the situation is.
Oh, so kind of a rediscovery of what they really want in life.
Yes.
After they've gone back. Thanks for adding that, Mr. Cooper. Yeah, let's find out who you are.
I'm Florence Archuleta.
Okay, now Florence, you have a daughter by the name of
Cookie.
And she was one of 2,075 couples that the Reverend Moon married in Madison Square Gardens.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
In July.
In July. How long had she been in the Unification Church before she was married by Reverend Moon?
3 years.
3 years. Had she ever known the person she was marrying until that day?
Never saw him till the night before the
The
ceremony.
night before the ceremony that she met her husband-to-be.
Because I talked to her on the phone when she was in New York, because she thought I was going to the wedding. And I said, well, when do I get to meet the gentleman? What's his name? She said, well, you'll meet him when you come to New York. And I said, well, you don't even know who you're marrying, are you? Do you? And she says, no. I said, and I just let it go at that, but she didn't have any idea who it was.
Yeah. Did you share with Doris Rear, who we met earlier, this feeling that your daughter was lost forever?
Yes, I sure did, because I went out to Dallas to visit her a year before that, in October, to try and convince her to come home, and they were watching us constantly. We didn't have any time.
You had no time
really
alone
talk.
with her?
No. We had somebody that called the hotel room to make sure, and I was afraid that everything was bugged. We couldn't talk at all.
So after she was married by Reverend Moon in Madison Square Gardens, how long did that marriage last?
Well, we just took her out in February. We rescued her in February.
Oh, this was a forceful
Yes.
maneuver?
Almost the same thing the Rears had to do, except that we didn't physically, remove her from where she was actually came home. They let her come home to visit, and we had a team ready here that we had been working on for, I think, about 3 months since before Christmas.
Who was on the team? Not the names, but what kind of people? These were professional deprogrammers?
Professional deprogrammers and ex-members of the Unification Church.
Oh, ex-Moonies.
Ex-Moonies.
Oh, I see.
They
They're
were
probably
counselors.
very effective deprogrammers.
Very effective. It was a hard job, but they did it. It took us 6 days, 6 full days.
Wow.
To keep her, and it was about the 3rd day before we finally got to her, because she was very stubborn and very much against it, and very, very much afraid.
Do you feel you have your daughter back?
Yes, I sure do. They even called and came down to the house looking for her, and I called the center, and I told him, I said, tell Reverend Moon to get somebody else to go out and peddle his flowers, because believe me, my daughter isn't going back.
We thank her for that, please. Thank you very, very much. Come on up. Come on up. Yeah. Right over here. What's your name?
Tom Young.
Tom, okay. What's been in your own personal involvement with cults?
Well, first thing I'd like to say is cult is, by technical definition, just a group or gathering of people.
Okay.
What this is about really is mind control or thought reform and the destructive things that happen.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of a real exaggerated form of some good qualities that groups and families can
all
possess.
these groups have some good qualities to them.
Sure.
And they're not all religious.
Right. What's your own involvement here?
Probably since the time I was about 17 or 18, I've been under some sort of control from somebody else until I was about 24 when I went through EST, and I felt something was wrong with that. And after about 6 months after I'd taken EST, I would not associate with the group anymore. And unfortunately, I haven't had anybody to deprogram me. So I spent 6 or 7 years working it out myself.
So you have not been in a formal cult as such.
EST is...
Oh, we're saying EST is a cult?
Okay. We're using the word cult for the destructive organization.
Okay, now there's a lot of people going to take issue with that. Now, I don't associate EST with like, the Hare Krishnas or the Family of Love or the Unification Church or, I mean...
Like I said, the word cult is a word we're using to describe these organizations that are destructive to people's minds.
Okay. Could you give me one example how you feel EST was destructive to your mind?
They implant their thought processes on you.
But aren't you there voluntarily?
Yes. And
You're not allowed to leave the room.
no,
You go in there, and once you're in the room, that's it.
there were people who tried to leave who were forcibly restrained.
Forcibly?
The doors
restrained?
were locked.
Oh, that I did not know.
Yes.
I didn't
And there's
know.
also the peer pressure through, like Deanne said, everybody's real effervescent about being there.
The love bombing, is it?
Yeah,
Is this the right
it's
term?
a little different than the movies, but
Yeah.
it's the same techniques.
Well, thanks for adding that. I do appreciate that very, very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Why don't you come up and join me? Yeah. Right over here. Let's find out who we have.
Alan Prendergast.
Okay, Alan, you have done quite a bit of research and writing about cults.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Some research.
Okay, and mention this person Lifton, some of the points here that we might emphasize.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested in hearing this from Mark or Deanne, since they know these by heart and I don't. But basically, I'd like to hear about it more in terms of the steps to the isolation that a group member goes through. And also, you were talking about an average deprogramming taking about a week. I've also seen studies that indicate that there can be continuing problems, mental problems, emotional problems, with a cult member after they've been removed from a group, depending on their length of stay and the amount of mental damage that's been done. And perhaps some people could talk about that in terms of their own experience.
Okay. Let me just, go ahead. Show us the resource here, Mark. What do we have?
This book is Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism. Was a study of brainwashing in China done by Robert J. Lifton. And this book was written before the cult problem. And in chapter 22 of this book, he alludes to 8 steps that he believes that the communist used and Adolf Hitler to bring people under control. And we have found, and us and both Lifton who wrote the book, that the cults are using the same 8 steps that are in this book.
Okay. Why don't you just read off what these 8 steps are? We're not going to go into detail, but just let people have some awareness of them.
Okay, the first step is milieu control, which is basically the control, the communication, and the environment. The next step is mystical manipulation, now that you explained some of these. And then the step after that's demand for purity, which she talked about a little bit before.
Okay.
You know, the group setting up the guidelines of what's pure. Then the cult of confession. Basically, and it's interesting, he used the word cult there even before this issue, came up. Basically, that in a lot of cults, open confession is encouraged, auditing, clearing, processing. Those are different terms from different groups where they confess, and that's used against them. Very effective in control. The sacred science is another step. That the,
Mark, back up one. So basically, the person is manipulated by their own sense of guilt.
exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, they reinforce it, and I've even heard cases of talking to many ex-members that have told me they've even made up things to confess because they ran out of things. And
They feel guilty. They don't have enough
that's right,
material to confess.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's go on.
Another step, the sacred science, basically, that their doctrine is the pure, and everything, basically, they are it, just to make it short without going deep into it. Loading the language. Evidently, the communists, when he did this study, did this. Basically, their own language system. Cynthia said something earlier when she was talking about she had some jackpots under her belt. That probably meant nothing to anybody else. And
I was afraid to ask, actually.
yeah. You see, and that is loaded language of the group. Very effective in control because one term can key a whole definition, and their mind basically floats into that, into that mindset. The second to last step, which is the doctrine over person. Basically, the way I look at this is the doctrine takes precedence over the experience. In other words, sometimes the doctrine is so impressive, this is what we're doing, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and again, this is all you're hearing, after a period of time, so you're accepting it because you have no other choice, is that when something different happens, they will actually bring the experience back into the doctrine. The doctrine actually has control over the person.
So it becomes self-validating in terms of what they're trying to
they have
manipulate you into thinking.
That's right. They got to bring it back in or they'll go nuts.
Our last
and the last one is dispensing of existence. And some people, we'd already mentioned that, that's basically the we-they mentality. We're totally right. No one else in the world even has the right to exist, in a psychological sense.
Sure. Okay, I appreciate that very much. Alan, what's happening here with cults? Are they expanding, contracting? What do we see?
I think what you've seen is, often what we get is just whether the media is on the case or not. There was a great outpouring of stories about cults about 5-6 years ago after Jonestown. Now it's become less of a hot issue to the press, partly because if you've heard one cult story, you've heard them all, precisely because so many of these groups are using these techniques that Mark described. One way or another, this is a perfect litmus test of mind control because some application is there. Is why it's so effective in deprogramming. Virtually any type of cult member can recognize some of those steps having been used on them. So the media backs off, but that doesn't mean that the cult problem is any less. I think you'll find that certain groups have changed their tactics. Citizens Freedom Foundation can tell you a little more about that. Some of them legitimize themselves just by the fact they've been around a little longer. They established special theological institutes or something like that. There are still probably, there are more splinter groups going off in different directions, but every bit of information I see shows that there probably is as many out there as there ever were.
Okay. Alan, thank you very, very much. Would we thank him, please?
Realizing now for the first time, that they have a child or some kin involved in the cult, that, to call one of those numbers, the convention's going to be in Los Angeles. Last year we had in Washington, we had over 800 people there, over 300 ex-cult members, and it's an excellent opportunity.
When will it be?
It's going to be the last week of October.
Okay, 1983 October.
1983 October.
And it is an annual event.
That is correct.
Okay, and if people want more information about contacting a Citizens Freedom Foundation in their locale, they can contact the national office.
That's correct.
Okay, fine. Mark Roggeman, I do appreciate you appearing here on Off the Wall. Deanne Weir and George Weir, most indebted to both of you in terms of very personal, very enlightening experiences. most of all, we want to thank you for watching this program. And if there is any cult you want to consider belonging to, I hope it's the one that includes membership of staying in front of your television set watching the next off-the-wall program. And would you please thank all of my guests and applaud yourselves